I have to be careful to keep the lapel mic off until the very end of the music, because nobody wants to hear me singing. Is it working now? Yes, okay, yes. I have to make sure that I save you all from my singing. So we've heard the story, and Susie really helpfully brought the story to life for us as well. The story of Jacob in the wilderness here. And I don't know about you, but I can kind of really relate to this experience for Jacob. Because he's prepping for a big day, and he's clearly having trouble sleeping. Now, this is something that I struggle with a lot, as my family can attest, right? Like, I struggle with insomnia quite a lot. I mean, I don't know if any of you experienced this, right? But you try to go to sleep, you lie down in bed, then you kind of start turning over in your head all the things that you should have done that day and that you kind of procrastinated and put off, and then you think, well, now I could do them, but now I need to sleep. And if I don't get to sleep, then how will I get up the next morning and get these things done? And it's particularly bad, right, when you know that you've got a hard deadline, you've got something that's happening in the morning, you know the alarm has to go off, you've got to get somewhere. So you think every minute that I'm sitting here not able to sleep is another minute that I'm getting closer to the time when I know I have to get up. So the time that I can sleep is shrinking and shrinking. And this is something that I struggle with a lot, like I speaking personally here. And Jacob certainly has something to get up for the next morning, right? Like, he's about to encounter his brother Esau. So to kind of give us a backstory of this, I just realized I didn't have yeah, okay, wonderful. So I'll just key you back one more, just to the fire for the minute, because this is where he is. He's at this fire in the night, in the dark. He's had quite a story, right? Mark kind of began this, or told us part of this story a couple of weeks ago, when he talked about Jacob having this dispute with his brother Esau. He had tried to trick him in various ways, and he had been forced to flee and move north. And if we could get the next one now, we can see Jacob's journey. He flees from Canaan and from what we would now think of as Israel, way north to Haran. And he's done that a couple of chapters earlier in Genesis. And so Jacob has fled up to Haran, where he is then going to try to settle down and make a new life. He ends up marrying one. This is the story that we skipped over, that you might be familiar with. He ends up marrying a woman, and then he wants to marry her sister, and then he marries her sister, and then he has children with the maids as well. He's got this big family that's developing there, and he's making deals with his father-in-law, and he seems to be kind of engaging in a lot of different kind of. He's trying to build up his own wealth and build up his own family and larger following there. And then he has this falling out with his father-in-law, and he feels that he's being called by God to return back down to Canaan and to the area around the Jordan River. And so he sets off and he travels back south. But just as he's getting towards the area, he decides that, he's got a history here, right? He's got a brother who's not necessarily going to be happy with him. So he sends out some messengers to go in advance and to check things out, and to say, like, what's going to happen here? And let Esau know that he's coming back. And the messengers come back and they say, we told Esau, and he's gathered up 400 men and he's coming to meet you. Which is a slightly ambiguous thing to say, right? Like, is he coming back with 400 men to celebrate that you're back? Or is he coming back with 400 men to attack you, right? And this is the context in which Jacob this is weighing on his mind. He's now approaching the area, and he comes up to close to the Jordan River, to this river here near Peniel, and he is camped there. And so he's going to make some contingency plans. He sends some of his people one way and some of them another way. He tries to scatter them so they can't all be surprised at once. And then finally, he makes this decision to move his wives and his children across the river, and then he settles down, and he says, right, now we're going to camp for the night here on my own along the side of the river. I can't get too close to that, clearly. So he's worried about this, and can we go to the next one, which is back to the fire. He's settled down next to the fire, trying to sleep, right? The fire starts to die down. The moon is potentially giving you a little bit of moonlight, but this is getting like a pretty dark place. There's not many people around, so this is not camping in, a place with ambient light in the sky like we tend to live with. This is pretty dark, and he's letting the fire die down, and he's trying to sleep, struggling to sleep. And then, out of the shadows, somebody jumps on him, right? Somebody just jumps out of the shadows. This is the jump scare. This is the moment when this figure appears. And this could sound like something out of a horror movie, right? This sounds like something out of, or at least out of kind of Bear Grylls. Has anybody watched Bear Grylls and like surviving in the wilderness? And you always have, like, just before the commercial break, something has jumped out at him, right, from behind the bushes, right? And I wonder how much we tend to think of our encounters with God in these moments, especially in the night when we're worrying, and sleeping, as God just jumping out at you from behind the bushes and telling you something something's gone wrong, and for Jacob, right, for this moment, right, he's done a whole bunch of things to Esau. He doesn't know, God has sent him back to this place, but maybe God has sent him back to experience this judgment, right? Maybe this is God correcting him. And it strikes me that this is how we tend to think about this idea of wrestling with God, wrestling with sin, wrestling with conviction, right? That this is God sort of jumping on us from the top buckle of the WWE wrestling ring, right? Like, wrestling with God means that God is coming down on you and saying, like, this is something you shouldn't have been doing, this is something that you, right? Like, that this is conviction, right? And this tends to be the way we think about, and like, at least to me, this is what kind of first comes to mind when you think about wrestling with God, wrestling with sin, wrestling with something that you shouldn't be doing, wrestling with some sense that God is not, that God has something that he wants to change in you. But that's not actually what's going on here. If we could go to the next slide. Because Jacob hadn't had that experience in some respects. Jacob was traveling back because he had been called to return to this land. He's following God's calling to return here. He's doing what God had asked. And just a few verses before what we read, he had already, when he heard about Esau, coming towards him, he'd already sat down and prayed, and he had said, Jacob prays, he says, God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, you said go back to the country, to your relatives. I'm unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you've shown me and shown your servant. I have only my staff when I crossed the Jordan. But now, so God has blessed him. God's given him a big family. He's given him all these things. He says, and you called me to come back here. You said, I will surely make you prosper, and I will make your descendants like the sands of the seas. So he says, no, I've been doing what you asked. I've got these symbols. This seems a bit like you're blessing me. And he's following God's path here. And like, again, this feels like we can relate to this, right? Like, sometimes we think, well, we've been doing all the right things. We've been doing what you've asked. It seems like this is the path you want to lead us on, like you want to lead me on. And then all of a sudden, I'm worried. I can't sleep. This seems like the path that you have set me forward on, but I still have anxieties. I still have worries. And that's what's going on here for Jacob. He's wrestling with this. Even though he feels like he's followed that path. But then I think that's why we really need to rethink what we mean by wrestling. It won't surprise anybody to hear that there's a fair amount of wrestling in my house. Stop jumping on your brother is one of the things that we hear most often in our house, right? this is, you know, like, roughhousing is something we know about. Like, and actually, as child development psychiatrists, I think, I mean, I should preface this by saying, I don't tend to read as much of this as Meg does. She reports to me what I need to know about these things, or tells me when I'm misunderstanding them. But that, you know, we know that, you know, young kids, especially young boys, wrestle, right? They roughhouse, they jump on top of each other. We even know this from the animal kingdom, if we can get the next slide, right? We know this, right? Like, the most famous example that you always see in nature documentaries is lion cubs, right? Wrestling with each other when they're kids. And we know that they're learning, like, the skills they need to hone the skills they need to fight. And yes, that's partly true. But they're also kind of experiencing intimacy, right? Closeness, understanding their own bodies by interacting with each other through the physicality of this. Like, wrestling with one another is an intimately physical process. And we see that in this story with Jacob and this stranger, right? Jacob wrestles with this stranger in the night, in the dark. He's grappling with him all night. He's holding him, he's pulling him, he's pushing him in different ways, right? He's experiencing him on a different level. And by the end of the night, right, like when you're grappling with this person in the dark, it might be completely pitch dark. But you can tell that by the end of the story, he would know, right? He would know, does this character have a beard? What kind of cloak is this person wearing? How tall is this person? He would have learned all those things by the end of the night, right? Like, even if he's wrestling with him in the pitch dark, because touch and feel does that, right? Some of the depictions, I think, of this story, particularly the ones in sculpture, if we can move to that, really capture this, right? This is actually from a cross depicting this story from Kells in Ireland, a Celtic cross dating from the 10th century. And this is a much later modern sculpture that's in the Tate Gallery in London. They capture the physicality, the touch of this experience, right? And they tell us that, you know, in these moments when we're experiencing this, do we feel, when we're experiencing those worries, that sleeplessness, do we feel that physicality, that touch of God? Do we understand these experiences as being about helping us to feel God's contours, to be in connection with him, which I think is what this wrestling is really about, right? It's not about pain, it's about that experience. But critically, of course, Jacob won't let go. You know, he's determined to hold on to this. He's in it for the long haul. He's going all night here. He's going to keep grappling with him. Why is he doing that? Well, because he's gradually coming to the realization that there's something more here than just a thief in the night. Right? This isn't just a thief or even his brother or one of his brother's henchmen jumping out from behind the rock. He's getting that knowledge. How is he getting that knowledge? Well, partly he's actually worked this out because of the miraculous experience of the hip, right? These are two people who've been fighting all night. They've been pretty evenly matched. To be able to continue wrestling all night, they must have been pretty evenly matched. And yet then suddenly the character in the dark is able to nudge him on the hip and throw it out of joint, right? Like, this doesn't fit with the rest of the story. Like, Jacob looks like he's winning, and all of a sudden there's this blow. And this must be reminding Jacob, right? Like, actually, there's something more going on here. This wrestling is not a fair fight in some respects, because this person can just touch me and knock my hip out of joint. And we tend to think about that, and it's important to think about it as a kind of way in which we are reminded of our dependence upon God and God's total power, right? Like that that we must be, where it's a symbol of our dependence upon Him. But it's also a way that we understand the power of this interaction, and that Jacob kind of comes to the realization of who's at play here. But what does he do? Like, he's just realized that this is God, or at least an angel. What does he do? Does he turn and flee? Does he say, like, actually, I'm going to run away? No. He says, bless me. He says, I'm going to carry on holding on to you until you bless me. Do we do that? In these moments of struggle, do we kind of say, this is really hard, this is really difficult, these are worries that are, when I can't sleep at night, do I say, actually, I'm just going to stick with this until I'm blessed? Like, I actually tend to follow a lot of the instructions that people come up with for sleeplessness, which is, if you can't sleep for a while, get out of bed, distract yourself, go do some housework, or go read a book, or do something else, right? Like, but Jacob here says, bless me. I'm going to stick with this, I'm going to keep on holding, I'm going to keep on wrestling here until you bless me. And then eventually, if we could go to the next slide, the sun rises. And the character seems to have disappeared. And Jacob is hobbling away. And yes, he's got his hip. How is he going to take the lesson away from this, right? Like, how is he going to, the morning comes up, real life returns. We all know about this, right? You get up in the morning and actually, like, everything looks different again. Your kids are awake and you have to get on with the day, and, like, the whole anxiety that was weighing you down, all the worries that you have, they kind of have to be put away. And Jacob has to go back to life. Esau's still coming back to him, coming towards him. So what does he do? Well, he has to remember the lessons. And how does he do it? Well, he does it because he's got this dislocated hip. That's going to be a pretty constant reminder for him, right? But for those around him, for his community, there are going to need to be other reminders. And that's where the renaming comes in, right? The man who he meets, God, the angel, has blessed him and has renamed him and has given him this name, Israel, strives with God. And that name is a reminder. And then not only that, but then Jacob goes on and says, I'm going to rename this place, Peniel, the face of God. And this is actually a through line through, if we can look at the next slide, through the story of Genesis, right? The book of Genesis really shows us a whole bunch of places where we get the characters, whether that be Abram or Jacob or Isaac, kind of renaming places. And in some respects, Genesis is a story about, like, this happened and this is why this place is called this, right? And for a pre-literate society that is experiencing the book of Genesis, right, that's important. That's what those place names do. That means every time you walk through there, you remember that story. It links that story to that place. It means that that relationship, that wrestling with God, is marked on the landscape. And, like, we still do that today to some extent. What do we do to keep remembering this message? What do we do to keep remembering these experiences when we struggled with something? How do we remember it? But in some ways, and this is where the second half of the reading from John comes in, we don't necessarily need to remember it in the same way, on the landscape way. If we could get to the next slide. Because for the story in John, we see actually quite a lot of parallels, right? We see a lot of parallels here between what's happened to Jacob and what's happened in this moment. Both of them have found out that but the disciples here have found out that there's a long, that God has a big plan and that it's got a big ambitious arc. And they're worrying, right? They're anxious. This is actually immediately in the book of John, immediately after Jesus has told Peter that he's going to deny him 3 times. Like, the next verse is where we started. And so they're all anxious and worried, and they're still in the upper room. They've just had the Lord's Supper. And they're all worrying and saying, what do we do? What's going to happen? How is this going to happen? This is exactly, in some respects, the same as Jacob. And we see Jesus, as Susie noted, kind of sitting with them, talking to them, wrestling with them in a different way, like telling them, like answering their questions, engaging with them. And interestingly, there's real parallels here because they keep asking him, just like Jacob does, who are you? Who are you really? Where are we going really? Where's the way really? We need to know. We need to understand. If you could go to the next, yes. Jacob asked him, the character, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you're asking me my name? And Jesus, similarly, they say, like, who are you? And show us the Father. And he says, Jesus said to him, I've been with you all this time, Philip, and you still don't know me? This is this knowing, right? This is knowing on a different level. Jesus is saying, just like the character's saying, you just wrestled with me all night. You know me. You don't know my name, but you know me because you know how tall I am, you know whether I've got a beard, you know like what I'm dressed like. You know me on a different level, right? And that's what Jesus is saying here, right? He's saying, you know me and you've lived with me. You don't need to, you through me, you see God. And if we can go to the next one, this is kind of captured, right, in these depictions of Jacob. This is another depiction of Jacob wrestling with this character, whether it be God or an angel. The close intimacy here. And that's what the message that Jesus then delivers is, right? He says to them, and it really captured in this image, I think, from the Old Testament, he says, I will be in God, you will be in me, and I will be in you. This is all interconnected. And I will prepare a room for you in a house. This is all really intimate. You'll live with me. You'll be in me, and I will be in you. And that's this kind of new mode. It's a different register than Jacob, right? It's the same anxiety, it's the same worry, but it's now saying, through the Spirit, you don't need reminders of this story. You don't need this to happen on one night and then be reminded about it. This will be onwards and always through the Holy Spirit. And that's what's different here once you get to the story that Jesus is telling. So as we wrestle with these things, as we wrestle with sleeplessness and all these problems and our worries, we need to I need to remind myself, right, to say, bless me, and put those worries into that context of just like, I will be in God and God will be in me. And I will get this new name because the Spirit is in me. And it's not just for one night, but it's for the long haul. It's forever. And that's what I think is really powerful about this message. As we turn from this, I have a prayer to say together, and then we'll have some time a few minutes to reflect on this. And so let's just say this prayer together. Holy God, you have revealed yourself to us in Jesus Christ. Everything we need to know about you has been shown. Your goodness, mercy, healing, and renewal are on full display. But sometimes we do not see what is right before us. We must understand you, and so we misunderstand the world. Forgive us, we pray. This where we are on life's journey. Wrestle with us anew. Restore to us the ability to see you as you really yourself. Renew within us the capacity to perceive your way in the world, for this life and in the life that is to come. If anyone is in Christ, there is a new creation. Everything old has passed away, and everything has become new. All this is from God, who reconciled us to God's self through Christ, and has given us the ministry of reconciliation. Believe in the promise of the gospel. Jesus Christ. So we'll now turn to, I have a piece of music that's going to play on the screen. I'd like